This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we are recording now. So again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to the May 2020 Rise and Shine here at the Chamber, our Economic Development Speaker Series. This morning we've got Jim Searcy, who is the Executive Director of the Economic Development Association of Alabama, also known as the EDAA. Jim became the Executive Director in 2013 after serving as the Executive Director as the Coastal Gateway Regional Economic Development Alliance. Jim previously served as Vice President for the Business and Industry Retention with the Birmingham Business Alliance. He's also served as the Vice President of Marketing for the Birmingham Metropolitan Development Board. He began his career in economic development as a project manager with the State Department of Commerce. On a personal note, Jim's married to Leslie, the former Leslie Haskell of Tuscaloosa. They have one son who's a junior at Auburn, War Eagle, Jim, War Eagle. The Searcys are also members of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Prattville. Shout out to Jeremy Arthur from Prattville in Alabama, where Jim serves on the vestry. So Jim, without any further ado, I will stop my screen sharing and I will turn it over to you. Hang on one second.
All right.
See if you pull that up.
There we go. All right. Have you got eyes on that?
Yep, got it out there.
All right. Perfect. Well, again, I want to thank Will, and I want to thank Heather and for this opportunity. I've spoken in Etowah County and in Gadsden a number of times. This is my first time making a electronic presentation. As a matter of fact, the first time I've been the sole presenter. I've been on a number of webinars as a panelist or in some other capacity. I've never had to carry the whole show. And I've given this is actually my remarks. Usually our title is Essential of Economic Development. And in this case, I've had to kind of revamp everything because obviously we're in a whole different arena than where we've been in the past. Also, I want to thank everybody for joining. When Will first called me, he said, "Hey, you got two choices. You got 8:30 or 10." And I noticed the name was the Rise and Shine Economic Development Series. And I was pretty confident everybody would have been risen. I'm just not sure how shining we would be. So I opted for the 10 o'clock start time. But let me go ahead and just kind of begin by telling you a little bit about EDAA. Some of you may know a little bit of our history. But the Economic Development Association of Alabama, EDAA, has been around for about 30 years. It started rather inauspiciously. It was a volunteer organization. Basically, the president of EDAA served as for lack of a better term, the executive director of EDAA. And the officers actually did, if you were the secretary and the treasurer, you were responsible for the finance of the organization. And it was a pretty small organization to begin with. And it was really more of a fraternity / sorority as far as the members go. And the real key change in changed the organization when they hired their first executive director was when Mercedes-Benz located in Vance. And I don't know how many of y'all are old enough to remember, but Governor Jim Folsom was the governor who had taken over midterm from Guy Hunt. He was the governor that actually located Mercedes, or he was his governor when they made the decision to locate in Alabama. And he subsequently, ran for a full term as governor, was defeated by Bob James. And Governor James had run on a kind of not his only platform, but one of the key components was that he was going to reevaluate the incentive package that was offered to Mercedes, and wanted to make sure it was worth pursuing. And obviously, in terms of economic development, had we reneged on that incentive package or changed it in any substantive manner, it would have been devastating for our efforts. So that's when EDA decided to formalize it. We increased dues. We hired an executive director and hired a governmental affairs organization to serve as advocate in governmental relations. But that's kind of where our history is. We have really one main mission, or there's three components of our mission. One is professional development. We offer two conferences, one in the summer, one in the winter. And then we have try to have four educational sessions or seminars, one every quarter. Of course, we've always also had to go to virtual seminars on that. We've held one. We are planning to have our summer conference at the Lodge at Gulf Shores the first week of August. And fingers crossed that we're going to be able to do that whatever social distancing mandate will be able to accommodate. But we use those to basically continue to improve the quality of the profession of economic development within Alabama. And so that's probably our focus is more on professional development. And then also networking events. I'm sure a lot of y'all are having similar situations that you're in your professions and your operations. Networking usually requires being somewhere together. And although I've participated in some Zoom happy hours, it's just not the same. It just allows you to avoid, the stigma of drinking alone. Apparently, if you're in a Zoom call, it doesn't count. This is just coffee, as a matter of fact. But we have networking events. And then finally, we have a really robust advocacy program, governmental affairs. Of course, normally this time of year, I'd be really, really busy with the legislature in session. Obviously, not so much. The House, I think, came in and passed both budgets yesterday. Those will go to the governor. They're taking up some local legislation, and then they're going to sine die. They'll end the session and be called back probably sometime in July for a special session. But that's, our interest is primarily making sure that there's nothing that negatively impacts economic development. And this last session, we've got two critical bills. One extends both of them extend the sunset on the Jobs Act and the Growing Alabama. Those are two incentive programs that are actually central to our economic development efforts. And we need to get those sunsets extended. Both those programs end December 31st. So we feel like that will be included in the call for the special session. And then there was some legislation that we anticipated being introduced in the Senate to provide some liability protection for companies as we restart the economy and bring employees back, trying to at least address the concerns that exist about liability for those companies that are doing that. That will probably have to be addressed in the special session as well. I want to go ahead and start, just kind of get it. That's all about economic development, EDAA. But I want to go ahead and give y'all a little bit. Here we go. Not sure how to back up. Let's see. There we go. Economic development. And if I ask everybody on the call kind of what they thought economic development was, you would all have a really good answer, but not necessarily all have the same answer. So for my purposes, and the way I've always looked at economic development, it is the creation of wealth, and the creation of that wealth in a community is done to provide resources to continue to build and sustain that community. So that's boiled down to its essence. That's what I think economic development is, which sounds really, really simple. And it really is, a simple process, but it's absolutely critical because you see a lot of communities, those that are most successful are the ones that have, I think, the most robust and the most effective economic development efforts. So that's where this allows them to do a lot of the community development and strengthening of their community. At the end of the day, economic development is selling, it's marketing, it's and your community is your product. Unlike selling cars or shoes or anything like that, you're continuously improving your product, and your product's continuously changing, and you're adapting to the market that you have. And that's what a lot of economic development organizations, that's the biggest challenge they have, is making sure that they are marketing their communities the way they should be marketing, and that they're marketing to the right customers. Ultimately, economic development is a relationship-based process, which I think, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of COVID, that's probably had the greatest impact on what we see in economic development, at least the traditional economic development process. Most people feel like when they see an economic development project, or they think of economic development, they think of the ribbon cutting. They think of the groundbreaking photograph they see in the paper or see on TV, where, especially in the summer, everybody is really, really uncomfortable because it's 100 degrees. They're all wearing coats and ties and suits, and everybody looks really, really uncomfortable. And on top of that, they have to wear a hard hat and try to time throwing dirt up at the same time. So that's what a lot of people think of economic development. What you really look at is the process, all of the activity, all of the input, all the meetings, all of the discussions that led up to that event. And that's the process. And that's where I think your economic development efforts are the most important. It's, once that happens, that's just the culmination of this process. So we want to do a little bit about that this morning, is to talk about that process. Economic development requires persistence and adaptability. It certainly does. I'll be honest with you, I was a practitioner. I was an economic development practitioner for 25 years. I've been with EDAA for, this will be my 7th year. And but prior to that, I was a practitioner. I worked at the state level, worked at the Alabama Development Office as a project manager. And I always tell people that's the best job I ever had, because that was dealing directly with prospects. And I also got to see everybody's economic development effort around the state. Alabama Development Office is now the Alabama Department of Commerce. It's the state's economic development agency. And it was really, really a learning experience for me. And I studied public administration at Auburn. Didn't really prepare me for economic development. There really wasn't at that time any kind of curriculum or anything that prepared you for economic development. And so I remember, this is a date myself, I had to fill out a card and send that in. And it used to have, this is before the internet, so you had a catalog of all the jobs in the state. And when I graduated, I went ahead and filled out, I think it was 3 cards, and sent them into the state. And I took a job with Alpha and did mortgage banking for several years. And then out of the blue, I got a letter from the state that said they had opened up a register, which is how they hired the state. And would I be interested in applying for a project manager 1 position? And I thought, well, sure. I was single and just wasn't particularly challenged by my position. So I thought, well, this would be good. And I didn't really have any idea of what was involved in economic development. But the reality was, so I filled out the application. This was a handwritten application. And on it was a question about, you're trying to kind of see what your skill set is. And they wanted to know if you spoke a foreign language, and I don't. So I took French in high school, but I don't speak a foreign language. And but I felt like that might give me a leg up. And I don't know, and I think the statute of limitations is passed. But I do believe that, and I don't recommend anybody doing this, but if you've ever put something down on a resume or on a job application that you fully intended to at some point make a reality, make it true, that's what I did. And but I didn't want to make myself look, I didn't want to put myself in a situation where I might actually have to use the foreign language I claim to understand. And at that time, this is prior to Hyundai's location in Alabama, or Kia in West Georgia. I actually said that I spoke Korean, which in hindsight, probably not the best choice. But I fully intended to learn it. It's just a lot more challenging as far as languages go. So, I've been there 2 weeks, get the job, and I'm not sure exactly how. I don't know how many other candidates there were, but I don't know if my fluency in Korean was a difference maker. But I do know that I've been there about 2 weeks, and my boss called me up in front. And he goes, "Hey man, I got a great opportunity for you. We've got some Korean prospects coming into Birmingham. They're looking for a chip mill, and not a semiconductor chip mill. They're looking for a chip mill to make wood chips to use in the pulp and paper process." And as Will pointed out, I'm an Auburn graduate, and so my first response was just go, "Oh, that's no problem at all." And he said the president of the company's coming in and his executive VP, and the president speaks no English. His executive VP speaks some. And again, said no problem. So I meet him in Birmingham. We get off to a fabulous start. I've introduced myself. They're smiling and nodding, and just things couldn't go any better. And the executive VP, I asked him, I said, "Hey, where you guys want to go to dinner?" And we're in Birmingham, so there's a pretty good, even this, 25 years ago, there's a pretty good variety of restaurants we could take them to. They discussed among themselves. They decided they want to go to Quincy's, which was a steakhouse. Some of y'all may be familiar with that. And I remember thinking, man, these guys are going to be a dream. They're going to be really easy to deal with. We go to Quincy's, get up next morning, heading up to North Alabama. We're going to look at several sites on our way to, we're going to wind up in the Shoals area around Florence and Tuscumbia. We make the trip. The president of the company sat in the back of my state car, which at that time was a 1994 black Crown Victoria, a very ominous looking vehicle. If you've ever seen the Blues Brothers, the movie Blues Brothers, it's what they were driving. But anyway, he chain smoked Lucky Strike cigarettes all the way up till we got right outside of Florence, to the point that it looked like the car was on fire going up 65. And so we stop and we get out, take pictures, we meet with local developers. We're running behind. I'm supposed to get to Florence by like 7, and I mean, it's 6:30, and I'm just coming off of 65. So we're driving, and the president of the company has not said a word all day. And all of a sudden, he says something to his assistant, and his assistant looks at me and he goes, he wants to take a picture of a Southern home, a traditional Southern home. And so I'm thinking antebellum, and I'm thinking, man, we're lucky because Joe Wheeler's home place is right on the highway between 65 and Florence. So, we go by there. I say, "Is this?" And he goes, "Nope, he wants to see something else." He identifies a small farmhouse about, I don't know, quarter of a mile off the road with a pasture in front of it. I stop the car. They run towards the house taking pictures. And at that time, I'm thinking, this seems to be spiraling on me. I really don't have any experience, but I do know. I mean, I've never been to Korea. Maybe it's not uncommon to have American nationals run towards your house taking pictures, but I'm telling you, in Lauderdale County and up in that area, it's a cause for concern. So they're running towards the house taking pictures. I'm running towards the house just to try to keep them getting shot. And so I get up there and knock on the door. Thankfully, no one is at home. And so I turn around. There's nowhere to be seen. And I look out, and I'm thinking, man, I don't have nothing's prepared. I've only been at ADO for like 3 weeks. I'm thinking, man, this is going to be tough because I have to call my boss and say I've lost the prospects. And I'm sure he'll be very conciliatory and say, "Hey, man, they're all located in Alabama, but I'm going to have to sell them. We don't have any bodies to send back to Seoul, so this could be a problem." And anyway, by the time I was thinking, trying to figure out what I was going to tell my boss, I hear a dog barking, and I think, surely to goodness they didn't go behind the house. And about that time, I see the president of the company running as fast as I've ever seen a human run, and right behind him was his executive VP, and behind them was just a small, what I consider just a yard dog, but man, a really, really aggressive one and very territorial. And they make this kind of arching loop towards the car. And once they got out of what I think the dog felt like was his territory, he backed off and tried to back towards the house. And I get to the car, and as I said, the president was a fairly heavy smoker, and you could actually hear him breathing. Oh man, 10 yards away. And so he didn't say anything, and the assistant VP didn't say anything. They just got in the car. So we finish up in Florence. They don't really smile and nod as much. It had gotten more of a, it had taken on a rather ominous, the visit had taken on kind of an ominous nature. The next morning, handed them off to Georgia Industry and Trade, which is our counterpart in Georgia. And they, eventually went back to Montgomery. Was telling my boss, he wanted to know how it went. I said, it went great. And they turned it over to a gentleman named Dave Eccles, who actually had some experience in working with Korean companies. He was just hadn't been available to begin with. And and I'd say this is a very long story, but I do this to kind of show how difficult and how challenging economic development is, and how sometimes it's unintended consequences. They did locate in Alabama. They located just north of Saraland, and I don't know how many of y'all know where Saraland is, but it's in Mobile County, and it's just about as far away south as you can get from that dog up outside of Florence and still stay in the state. I count that as my first international project that I was successful in bringing to fruition. But again, that kind of shows the persistence and the adaptability necessary for economic development. To further kind of explore the adaptability aspect of it, I think what you're going to see now, we're working with a lot of different organizations to try to develop a virtual prospect visit. Traditionally, people would fly in, whether that was a team from a company, more than likely it was a consultant and maybe a team from their consultancy. And they would come in, they'd visit 3 or 4 communities in Alabama, sit down, meet physically. We'd all get in a van, go out, look at the site, maybe meet with, if you need a grid power user, meet with representatives of Alabama Power or Power South or TVA, depending on where you were looking. If you were a big water user, you'd have the local water board folks there, the municipal representatives, sometimes the mayor. But it was a really, really intense one-on-one or group-on-group meeting. I don't think you're going to see that. I don't think you're going to see that probably for 6 to 12 to 18 months where we get back to something like that, if we ever do. I think what's going to happen is you're going to see more virtual prospect visits, kind of like this, where you're going to be on a call with video, and somebody's going to have control of the screen, and you're going to sell your community electronically. So it's going to be important, I think, that people, economic development organizations, invest in technology, but also invest in understanding how to best utilize that technology. The other thing is enhanced web presence. Everybody, I think there's been an awful lot discussed and talked about in terms of web access, or your web presence. I can remember when economic development first really, and that's been the biggest change in economic development in my lifetime, has been the introduction of technology. But there used to be a discussion how much information you put on your web page, because you didn't want to put too much. You wanted to put enough to where they eventually had to call you to get more information. That has evolved into, you put everything you know on your web page or on, about your community in that economic development portal, to make sure whoever accesses it has a pretty good idea of what they're looking at. The reality is, if you don't provide that level of detail and that granular picture of your community, you're probably going to get eliminated. Because economic development, we talk about the site selection process. In all honesty, it's the site elimination process. A company may look at it and say, okay, we want to be in the Southeast, and they retain a consultant, or they give that responsibility to somebody internally, and they take the universe that is the Southeast, and let's just say they start out looking at 100 potential locations, 100 potential communities or regions. Then the process begins to eliminate those. And so if they can't determine what your infrastructure situation is, what your workforce situation is, by doing an in-depth analysis on the information you're providing, you're going to get eliminated. Most of the time, by the time you get a call or you're contacted, they may call the Department of Commerce, call one of the utilities, but by the time you know about that project, they've already done a good bit of evaluation. And what they're doing, they want to engage with the community to basically verify the information they have, to make sure it's like, hey, when you say this is your workforce situation, these are the skills that are available. Is that true? And then you have to demonstrate and quantify. So that's, and they get that in their task with, okay, you get the universe of the Southeast and 100 communities down to 4. And that's what the process is. It's just eliminating those 4 that will actually receive a site visit. So I do think that that's going to be a real important aspect of, what we're going to see going forward, and then addressing concerns, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on, but what the pandemic has done to workforce. I mean, and it's done it in 60 days. I can remember the last meeting we had about workforce was trying to figure out how we were going to address Alabama's 3.5 unemployment rate and how difficult it was to convince companies that there was a viable workforce in a lot of these communities, because that was our state rate. And some of these, in some of our communities, we had unemployment rates of 2% or a little bit less. So, how the pandemic and what it's done to the economy, also how it impacts logistics and what we start to visit as far as supply chain and then community infrastructure, how communities are dealing with those challenges. I think that's going to be where the future is going to go in terms of economic development and what we're going to have to be faced with going forward. Okay, finally, the third slide addresses the Alabama, our strategic plan. A lot of people are surprised to find out that Alabama has an economic development strategic plan. It's actually called Accelerate Alabama. We've had it for almost a decade. We are now in the Accelerate Alabama 2.0 and working on Accelerate Alabama 3.0. 3 R's, recruitment, retention, and renewal. I think recruitment and retention are both pretty obvious what they are. Renewal, I think, was just a word they had to keep the alliteration going, because it's never been clearly defined to me exactly what renewal means. But I want to just go briefly over how they're executing this. Recruitment, and that's basically every community and every state needs to ask themselves, what do you want and what you can do to attract that investment. There are a number of sectors that Alabama is pursuing, but the 3 I think that have the most relevance to Etowah County is automotive and supply chain or logistics, and then manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. The reason being, you have a federal highway, you also have an interstate, you've got that transportation infrastructure that a lot of folks are going to be looking for. I think we're going to look at reshoring and trying to beef up our supply chain, especially, at least top of mind right now, is obviously the medical supply chain. This has demonstrated, I think, some fundamental weaknesses. Not being able to produce and obtain and secure medical equipment in a timely fashion. Obviously, I don't think you're going to have, obviously this too will end and you won't have those kind of shortages, but it does show a certain vulnerability that I think will be addressed. And so I think you'll see not necessarily reshoring. I don't know if you'll see a lot of closing down of foreign operations and move into the U.S., but I think you'll see some investment by U.S. companies to make sure they have some capability. And I think Etowah County is well positioned to pursue that, as well as any kind of supply chain. You tie in to your proximity to Atlanta and then also to Birmingham and those transportation hubs. I think Etowah County is in really good shape to go after that. Retention, automotive, and obviously all located between Honda, Mercedes, and the new Toyota Mazda project. So I think y'all are going to be a prime location, maybe not for first tier suppliers, but for second and third tier suppliers. And again, I think what this pandemic has done has demonstrated the need for, being able to address some things domestically that you were maybe overly dependent on as far as foreign suppliers or suppliers that are located outside of the U.S. Real quick, the retention aspect of it. I say real quick. One thing that this COVID-19 has shown is that existing industry is extraordinarily important. We've always known it, and we've always given it kind of lip service, but this has kind of brought it to the forefront. And that's everything from large industry. That's everything from a a Mercedes to a Hyundai to a Sipco, Alstom. I mean, those large those large manufacturers down to a 25 or 50 employee fabricating shop in terms of manufacturing. Certainly, existing restaurants and existing entertainment venues have been devastated by this. And just I saw a survey of economic development organizations as well as chambers, and probably 90% of what they were doing in the first month of the shutdown associated with the pandemic was they were trying to figure out how they could help their existing industry, specifically specifically those who were having to lay off and all of a sudden saw their revenue dwindle so quickly. Man, what it's done to retail and what it's done to the service and leisure industry is just remarkable. So I think that's one thing you'll start seeing now, that existing business and how you address their needs is going to be a lot more. It's not going to make up a much larger portion of economic development organizations and agencies and chambers. It's going to make up a much larger part of their strategy going forward. Renewal, basically that's used to kind of talk about entrepreneurship and innovation and disruption. I think for communities now, what you're going to see or what the potential is, we've got some great examples of innovation and entrepreneurship. Etowah County, I mean, Back 40 Beer was, they were doing what they were doing before it became, you can't sling a dead cat without hitting a microbrewery now. But Back 40 was kind of on the cutting edge of it, and Jason and his efforts, that kind of demonstrates what entrepreneurship can do for a community, because you got somebody, a local person, who has established and grown his business and is committed to staying there, committed to the community. So instead of asking a company through recruitment to put down roots and hopefully keep those roots there with entrepreneurship and innovation and local efforts, then you got somebody who's already got roots there. All you're tasked with doing is going ahead and nourishing those roots to ensure that they stay in place and that they stay viable. The other thing to want to look at, and can't really mention this presentation without talking about the closure of Goodyear. I know that's devastating to Etowah County, and but I think at the end of the day, it will, in some ways, y'all will be able to weather this. I anticipate it because y'all have weathered slowdowns and layoffs before. I think this will put you in a pretty enviable position when you go to recruit manufacturing, because you'll have a fairly substantial workforce that has manufacturing experience. And I know we saw the same thing with International Paper when they closed up in Cortland. It was a blow to the community, a really, really big blow to the community. But it showed them two things. One, all of a sudden they were able to retain some of that workforce as they were able to go out and more effectively recruit manufacturers. But also, I think it just allowed the local communities to diversify their economy. That's a challenge in a lot of communities in Alabama. And it's kind of the old saying, you'd rather have 10 companies that employ 100 than one company that employs 1,000. So I think that's part of the new way of looking at economic development as we move forward. And I think that innovation and entrepreneurship is going to be critical. And I think Etowah County is in really good shape to pursue that as a strategy. Everyone, obviously everybody wants to win a project, but I will say this, there's no one person that ever locates a company. If anybody ever tells you, I brought, I brought Acme Manufacturing. I brought Advanced Auto Parts. I brought, the transportation. Um, I brought a logistics company, a trucking company, to wherever, to Gaston, to Birmingham, to Evergreen, wherever. They did. Um, Although my mother, who passed away last year, died comforted in the knowledge that I'm the one who located Mercedes. And because as much as I told her I was on the team, she just assumed that I had done it. And, she was my mom, so I wasn't going to tell her different. But anyway, it is a team effort. Different projects require different team members. If you've got a large manufacturer or a food processor, then they're going to be really, really concerned about the availability of water. If you've got, and don't think that you don't have opportunities to pursue software companies. Community I work with down in South Alabama, Bruton, attracted Provolis, and they do code and they write software for use on the cloud. They're going to employ about 150 people, and they're in a community of less than 8,000 people. So a lot of it is you just got to be able to demonstrate connectivity. In that instance, they put together a really strong team from the state and then also the county and the city of Bruton to make that happen. Everybody's going to play a role, and that's going to change. But there's always got to be a leader in any kind of economic development project process, and that's going to change. Sometimes it might be, the chamber there in Etowah County. It might be Maryland. It might be Bill Green. It might be somebody there. It might be Holly Pegg with the Alabama Department of Commerce. It could be, just about anybody. Brooks Crockett with NADA. There are a lot of people that have input into that project, but there's always got to be somebody, a point of contact, and you really have to put egos aside to be effective at that. Leadership, I can't say enough about it. I'll discuss it a little bit later on, but that's the key. I think the key to successful economic development is effective leadership, and you need to be able to identify those leaders in your community that can be the most effective. Find the lesson in every project. I'm going to be honest with you, and I think most economic developers will tell you, you lose a lot more than you get. You lose a lot more projects than you actually land. The reality is, you can learn something from every project. And sometimes, most of the time, it's nothing you have control of. It's that being 200 miles north or 50 miles north cut their costs to a certain point in terms of shipping, that it just made that a more attractive, made it a more attractive choice for them. I will say this, and some of y'all remember that one time Advanced Auto Parts had a warehouse in Gaston. I worked with Mike McCain when he located that. And to give you an idea of how good Mike was, they were competing against Talladega. Talladega had a site that actually was adjacent to the Talladega Speedway. And I'm thinking, man, they were going to put a sign up that you'd actually be able to see from, the cameras every time it made a lap. And I thought, boy, how are you going to ever, get them to locate anywhere than that? It just seemed like a perfect fit. And then we met, we were late getting to Gaston, showed them the site. It was almost dark, but McCain was able to convince them. And actually, at the end of the day, show where there was an economic advantage for company. Because as much as we talk about quality of life, and that's important, and relationships, those are important. Ultimately, company's going to have to make a business decision, and you want to make sure if there's something you can change as far as the lesson you can learn from a project, you want to make sure you incorporate that change. Infrastructure drives economic development. We talked about that. Y'all are in great shape. A river, interstate, mega site, other industrial sites. Y'all are in really good shape with that. Adequate water, adequate power, pretty good fiber network. So there's an awful lot to be comfortable with there. Need to always constantly be improving. But I think the certification of the mega site, I think, bodes very well. Is it going to pay off in 6 months? Probably not. But could it pay off in 18 months? Absolutely. There aren't that many large mega sites in the state, especially located in the northern part of the state. There's one down in Baldwin County. But you're also, when you start looking at your labor draw, you're really well positioned to have a mega site. And then, second, is human infrastructure. And that's probably the most important. That's the biggest change we've seen as a result of the pandemic. You had, like I say, 2 months ago, we were talking about where people were going to find employees. They just came out with the unemployment rate for the month of April, and nationwide it's jumped to 14.7%. And as drastic as that is, and I think that's one of the things they're throwing numbers. It was 14.7% in April. The economy shed 20 million jobs. I think those numbers are so out there. I mean, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it, because you think of where we were from, our unemployment rate at the first of the year was less than 4%, and to shed that many jobs that quickly is just devastating. And even in Alabama, you basically have had 450,000 unemployment claims since we started the whole battle against COVID. And it's going to be interesting to see how long and what the recovery looks like. I don't think it's going to be a V recovery. I don't think you're going to see the sharp drop off and then a really sharp rebound. I think it's going to be maybe a W, where you have a sharp drop off, you have a fairly decent rebound, and then you have another downturn. It just depends on how things go with the pandemic. If we get a rebound in the summer or in the fall, that could be devastating for our economy. I'm kind of thinking that what you're going to have is a U economy. You had a really steep drop off, and then I think you're going to bounce along at a certain level, and then probably, hopefully, by the end of the fourth quarter, the first quarter of 21, you see a significant rebound. But that 15 cents, well, I don't know, that $1.25 will get you a cup of coffee. And the good thing about making presentations in this environment, you can say just about anything, and it's got as good a chance as anything of being true. So I think that's one of the things we're looking at in terms of how to promote that human capital or human infrastructure. We're pretty well positioned in Alabama because we've aligned our K through 12 with our K through 12 with our community colleges as well as 4 universities to try to better meet what those needs are of our potential employers and employers. So we've got that mechanism in place. It's just going to be a question of identifying those opportunities as they come up, and we come out of an economic development, or we come out of the, I don't know, call it a recession. It's not a depression, but come off the stopping of the economy as a result of the pandemic. I will say this: I don't think you're going to see project activity really increase significantly until after the first of the year. It would have slowed down anyway because you have a federal election, and historically, when there is a presidential election, you always see a slowdown because there is some uncertainty as to the state, the leadership, the actual leadership of the country. So companies are really hesitant to make investments without knowing what the future holds. That's just been extraordinarily exacerbated because of the pandemic. So I think you'll see probably 6 months of very light project activity, but I think when it does rebound, it'll rebound strong. I'll say this about economic development infrastructure. I did have an opportunity to work in a community over in the western part of the state. I was still working for the state and got a call from a mayor. We had put out a call for different projects, for a project and different criteria for locations, and he called me and said, Jim, why didn't y'all submit my city? And I said, because you don't have water to your industrial park. And he said, well, I can get water to the industrial park. And I said, well, they're coming in 2 weeks. You can't get industrial. You can't get water to the industrial park in 2 weeks. He goes, yeah, I can. And I told him, I said, now you understand this is like, this isn't a truck of water, so I don't need a tank of water. This guy, he goes, oh yeah, we got it. And so I called the prospect back and said, look, just politically, just to help me out, it's right on our way to another site. Can we stop in this city, in this community, and look at their site? And they said, sure, no problem. Take us 30 minutes to the itinerary. And so we get over there, we pull into the industrial park, and it looks great. It's been mown. I mean, it's been mowed. It just looks great. And they cut in a dirt road. But about every, 50 yards, there is a brand new fire hydrant. And I went, man, I don't know how he did it, but just, man, and man, the prospect gets out of the car, they're taking pictures, they're thinking, man, this is great. This is great. And they're looking at me like, man, I can't believe you didn't promote this site. And so my shoe's untied. So I start walking over to the fire hydrant. I was gonna put my shoe up there and then tie my shoe, and I get almost to the fire hydrant and the mayor yells, Jim. And I like turn around and said, yes, sir. And he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm tying my shoe. He said, come here for a second. And so I walk back over there and I go, yes, sir. And he goes, hey, don't put your foot on that fire hydrant. It's not connected. And I remember thinking, well, you do know how fire hydrants work, right? They don't produce their own water. You got to do that. So he goes, yeah, we're going to get the water in here. We're going to get a grant from EDAA, and we're going to get water in here. But it's probably going to be 18 to 24 months. And he goes, don't tell the prospect. And I said, okay, Mayor, that's fine. So I told the prospect, and they got a big chuckle out of it. But I also said, if you were looking for a unique souvenir of your trip to Alabama, I offered to give them a brand new fire hydrant to take home as a conversation starter. But I do believe that Etowah County is going to do really, really well going forward as the economy recovers. Will, Heather, Marilyn, Bill, you've got a great team in Etowah County and in Gaston, and I think we're going to be doing about as well as can be expected. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but I do think the economy will be back sooner than later. And then again, those are all the things that I think we've discussed today, and they all play a role. But I think for right now, what we're looking at is labor. Is availability of labor is going to be the driving force in most projects, as well as location and product. You've got that covered. The great unknown, I think, is going to be what our labor situation looks like. Any questions?
Yeah, if we have any questions, Jim, thanks for that. That was fantastic. If we have any questions, would you guys please submit those to the chat function, or if you would like to, you can unmute yourself and ask them.
I went ahead and put my contact information up there. If anybody has, anybody has any questions, following, just, hey, shoot me a text or an email. Yeah, Heather, I think what we're seeing, at least what we're hearing, is companies initially had said, hey, we're just going to put it on hold. I have heard of 2 or 3 companies that have decided not to move forward with their projects. And I think you'll see that more actively. As far as just saying we're not going to do it, I don't think anybody's at that point. I think people are saying we're not going to make a decision until we get a better idea of what the landscape is. But I think instead of saying, hey, we're going to wait till after the election, I think they're going to say, hey, we're going to wait till, mid-21 to the end of 21 before we make a decision forward.
Do we have any other questions for Jim this morning? Anybody else? Okay, well, oh, you see that from Jonathan Tang, Jim?
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I think it was primarily local. They looked at leads, and they also looked in a little bit further east. But they kind of follow their own course. I actually met the guy that's with Bucky's, and they really have been really pleased with their Baldwin County location. That was their first foray outside of Texas, and man, that so it couldn't have gone better for them. That's one of the reasons they looked at the Leeds location. But I think that was primarily local. They came in once they had decided on a site, and that's when they came in and met with the state once they had already been in discussions with the folks at Leeds.
Rebecca says, thank you for your time. Thanks for the comment, Rebecca. I just posted a chat. So the recording of this will be posted later today, probably the next hour or so. On our website, it's at nychamber.org/COVID-19. If there are no other questions going once, going twice. Okay. Well, Jim, Heather, thank you so much, Jim.
Hey, my pleasure, man. Thanks a bunch.
Yeah. So Jim, thank you again for taking time this morning and joining us. Really appreciate you doing this for us and partnering with us on this. If you guys have any questions, you can feel free to email Jim. His contact information is still on the screen, or you can reach out to me at the office. I'll be happy to provide you his information as well. I'll go ahead and stop the recording now.